Here is something almost nobody talks about. The countries with the lowest rates of digestive disease, autoimmune disorders, and chronic inflammation don't share a common diet. They don't share a religion or a geography, but they share one habit. Almost every traditional culture that survived and thrived for centuries has been fermenting food. Not as a culinary trend, not as a wellness experiment. As a biological necessity they understood long before science had the vocabulary to explain it. Your gut contains roughly 38 trillion microbial organisms. That number isn't a metaphor. It's a measurement. And the composition of that microbial ecosystem determines far more than whether you feel bloated after dinner. It influences your immune response, your hormone regulation, your mood, your sleep, your metabolic health, and according to a growing body of research, even the clarity of your thinking. What feeds that system? Fermented food. Not supplements. Not powders. Actual, traditionally fermented food, the kind humans have been eating for thousands of years. Today we're going through 15 of them. Not ranked by popularity, but by what science has actually confirmed. Stay through the whole list, because number 9 is one most people have never heard of, and researchers at Stanford recently identified it as having one of the most significant effects on gut microbiome diversity of any food ever studied. And number 14 is something you've probably walked past in the grocery store 100 times, completely unaware of what it was doing. Let's start. Number 1. Kefir. Most people have heard of kefir. Very few understand what it actually is. Kefir is not yogurt with a different label. It is a fundamentally different product, produced by a different process, containing a different class of organisms. Where yogurt typically contains 2 to 7 bacterial strains, authentic kefir fermented with traditional kefir grains can contain anywhere from 30 to 50 distinct strains of bacteria and yeasts, living in a symbiotic relationship passed down through cultures in the Caucasus Mountains for centuries. A 2021 study published in Nature found that kefir consumption produced more consistent improvements in gut microbiome diversity than any other single dietary intervention tested. The bacteria don't just pass through. Several strains, particularly Lactobacillus kefiri, have been shown to actively colonize the intestinal lining, outcompete harmful bacteria for receptor sites, and produce compounds called bacteriocins that function as natural antimicrobials. Kefir also contains a unique polysaccharide called kefrin, linked to anti-inflammatory effects in the gut lining itself. Most grocery store kefir is heat-treated after fermentation, which kills the live organisms. Look for raw or refrigerated versions with a short shelf life. That's how you know the cultures are still alive. Number 2. Kimchi. Korea has some of the lowest rates of several digestive cancers in the world, and researchers have spent decades trying to understand why. Kimchi keeps appearing in the data. This fermented vegetable dish, made primarily from Napa cabbage and Korean radish with chili, garlic, and ginger, undergoes a lactofermentation process that produces a remarkably dense microbial community. A single gram of mature kimchi can contain up to 1 billion colony-forming units of beneficial bacteria. Here is what makes kimchi distinct. The fermentation transforms the raw ingredients in ways that amplify their nutritional properties. The capsaicin in chili interacts with the fermentation process to produce metabolites that reduce intestinal permeability, literally helping seal the gut lining. A 2020 clinical trial found that participants who consumed kimchi daily for 4 weeks showed measurable reductions in markers of systemic inflammation, improved gut microbiome diversity, and better fasting blood glucose. All without changing anything else about their diet. Number 3. Miso. Japan's relationship with miso goes back over 1,000 years. Miso is produced by fermenting soybeans with a mold called Aspergillus oryzae and salt, a process that takes months to years depending on the variety. What emerges is biochemically extraordinary. The The fermentation breaks down soy proteins into free amino acids and bioactive peptides, several of which have been identified as ACE inhibitors, compounds that naturally support healthy blood pressure. Long-fermented varieties, red and barley miso, contain particularly high concentrations of isoflavones in their most bioavailable form. Research has linked regular miso consumption to reduced risk of gastric cancer, improved bone density, and lower incidence of hormone-dependent conditions. One critical note: heat destroys the live cultures. Add miso to warm water, not boiling. That single adjustment is the difference between using it as a condiment and using it as medicine. Number 4. Sauerkraut. Sauerkraut may be the most misunderstood food on this list. The jarred version sitting on supermarket shelves is almost universally pasteurized. It is not fermented food in any meaningful biological sense. It is pickled cabbage. The real thing has been a survival staple across Central and Eastern Europe for centuries. Captain James Cook carried barrels of it on long voyages as a preventive against scurvy, and his crew's health outcomes were dramatically better than ships that didn't. Live sauerkraut contains Lactobacillus plantarum and Leuconostoc mesenteroids in concentrations that rival commercial probiotic supplements. It is extraordinarily rich in vitamin C, along with vitamin K2, a nutrient most people are severely deficient in, which plays a direct role in directing calcium into bones rather than arterial walls. Studies show that consuming just 2 tablespoons of raw sauerkraut daily can begin shifting gut bacteria composition within 2 weeks. 2 tablespoons. If you find this kind of content valuable, and you want science-backed breakdowns of foods your body actually needs, hit subscribe right now. We go deep on these topics every week, and this list is just the beginning. Number 5. Natto. Natto is fermented soybeans produced using a bacterium called Bacillus subtilis natto. The result is a sticky, intensely flavored food that is an acquired taste, to put it generously. But here is the thing about natto. It contains one of the most studied compounds in cardiovascular nutrition. That compound is nattokinase, an enzyme with a proven ability to dissolve fibrin, the protein that forms blood clots. Multiple clinical trials have confirmed that nattokinase reduces platelet aggregation and supports healthy blood viscosity. Natto is also the single richest dietary source of vitamin K2, specifically the -7 Malawian Quachas form, which has the longest half-life in the body and the strongest documented effect on calcium metabolism and arterial health. 100 grams contains more K2 than most people consume in an entire month from other sources. Japan, where natto consumption is highest, has some of the lowest rates of cardiovascular disease and stroke in the developed world. The taste is real. So is the benefit. Number 6. Kombucha. Kombucha is tea fermented by a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast over 1 to 4 weeks. The fermentation produces a range of organic acids, including acetic acid, gluconic acid, and glucuronic acid, along with B vitamins, enzymes, and a modest but meaningful population of live organisms. Glucuronic acid in particular supports liver detoxification pathways by binding to toxins and facilitating their elimination. The key distinction is sugar content. Commercial kombucha sweetened after fermentation is a very different product from properly fermented kombucha, where the sugars have been consumed by the culture during the process. If the sugar content is above 5 grams per serving, the fermentation was cut short or the product was back-sweetened. You want the tart version. That's the one doing the work. Number 7. Tempeh is soybeans fermented with Rhizopus oligosporus mold, pressed into a firm cake, and it is one of the most nutritionally complete plant foods in existence. The fermentation eliminates most of the phytic acid in soy, the anti-nutrient that blocks absorption of zinc, iron, and calcium. What remains is a complete protein with all essential amino acids, substantially improved mineral bioavailability, and a dense population of beneficial organisms. Research published in Food Microbiology found that tempeh fermentation increases iron bioavailability by up to 85% compared to unfermented soy. For people eating plant-based diets, that is not a minor detail. Number 8. Kvass. Kvass is a traditional Eastern European fermented drink made from dark rye bread and water. It has been consumed across Russia, Ukraine, and the Baltic states for at least 1,000 years. The fermentation produces a mildly sour beverage rich in B vitamins, organic acids, and beneficial bacteria. Rye contains arabinoxylans, a soluble fiber that functions as an exceptional prebiotic, selectively feeding beneficial bacteria in the colon. Beet kvass, made from raw fermented beets, is a variation with particularly high betaine content, a compound that supports liver function and reduces homocysteine levels, a significant cardiovascular risk marker. Number 9. June tea. This is the one most people have never heard of. June is sometimes called the champagne of kombucha. It is fermented using green tea and raw honey rather than black tea and refined sugar, and the culture driving the fermentation is genetically distinct from standard kombucha cultures, containing different ratios of bacterial and yeast species. The honey provides naturally occurring antimicrobial compounds including hydrogen peroxide, defensin-1, and methylglyoxal that interact with the fermentation in ways that standard sugar fermentation cannot replicate. The Stanford Human Food Project study, published in Cell in 2021, examined dietary interventions and microbiome diversity across a large human cohort. June was among the fermented beverages analyzed. High-fermented food diets produced significantly greater microbiome diversity than high-fiber diets alone. The diversity increases were measurable within 10 weeks, accompanied by reductions in 19 distinct inflammatory protein markers. Not 2. Not 5. 19 proteins associated with conditions ranging from type 2 diabetes to rheumatoid arthritis showed statistically significant reductions. Number 10. Lassi. Before there were probiotic supplements, there was lassi. This fermented dairy drink from the Indian subcontinent, consumed for thousands of years, is made from churned cultured yogurt, water, and spices, most traditionally cumin, which has documented digestive enzyme-stimulating properties. The live cultures in traditionally prepared lassi include Lactobacillus bulgaricus and Streptococcus thermophilus, along with wild regional strains that vary by household. The fat in lassi serves a critical function. Fat-soluble vitamins produced during fermentation require dietary fat for absorption. The traditional preparation understood this without needing clinical confirmation. Number 11. Preserved lemons. Preserved lemons are whole lemons fermented in salt and their own juice over 4 to 6 weeks, a staple of North African and Middle Eastern cuisines. The lactofermentation transforms the rind completely. The bitterness disappears. The bitter compounds in the pith, particularly limonoids and flavonoids, are converted into more bioavailable forms with enhanced anti-inflammatory activity. The fermented rind contains probiotic organisms alongside citrus polyphenol, and that combination creates a synergistic effect that neither fresh lemon nor a probiotic supplement can replicate alone. Number 12. Native Hawaiian cuisine was built around taro. Poi, the fermented paste made from cooked taro root, was the dietary foundation of traditional Hawaiian culture for generations. The fermentation of taro produces lactobacillus species at concentrations comparable to commercial yogurt, alongside a prebiotic fiber profile unlike almost anything else in the human diet. Taro contains resistant starch and non-digestible oligosaccharides that function as selective food for Bifidobacterium species, some of the most beneficial bacteria in the gut. Researchers studying Hawaiian population health noted that communities maintaining poi as a dietary staple showed significantly lower rates of allergic and inflammatory conditions compared to those who adopted Western diets. The fermented version, not fresh taro, drove those outcomes. Number 13. Injera. Injera is the fermented sourdough flatbread that forms the foundation of Ethiopian and Eritrean cuisine, made from teff, a grain native to the Horn of Africa. The batter ferments for 2 to 3 days before cooking. The fermentation dramatically improves the nutritional profile. Phytic acid drops significantly. Iron and zinc become substantially more bioavailable. The organic acids produced during fermentation slow the glycemic response of the bread, producing a stable blood glucose curve. Teff is gluten-free, high in resistant starch, and contains calcium in concentrations significantly higher than most other grains. Injera is simultaneously bread and probiotic delivery system. Ethiopian communities understood this relationship for centuries without a clinical framework to describe it. Number 14. Film joke. This is the one you've probably walked past without knowing what it was. Film joke is a traditional Scandinavian fermented milk product, similar to yogurt but produced at room temperature by a different set of bacterial strains, primarily Lactococcus lactis and Leuconostoc species. The texture is pourable. The flavor is milder than kefir. The fermentation produces a particularly high concentration of exopolysaccharides, long-chain sugars secreted by the bacteria that have documented prebiotic properties of their own, feeding subsequent beneficial bacterial growth in the colon. Swedish research has consistently found associations between regular film joke consumption and reduced incidence of childhood allergies and asthma, outcomes linked to the specific immunomodulatory properties of its bacterial strains. If you want to be notified the next time we break down research like this, with actual mechanisms rather than marketing claims, subscribe and turn on notifications. There's a lot more coming. Number 15. Water kefir. Water kefir closes this list for a specific reason. It is the most accessible, the most versatile, and the most overlooked fermented food for people who cannot tolerate dairy. Water kefir grains are a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeasts that ferment sugar water, coconut water, or fruit juice into a live, effervescent drink within 24 to 48 hours at room temperature. The bacterial strains include Lactobacillus nigellii, Lactobacillus hilgardii, and Leuconostoc mesenteroids, organisms with documented adhesive properties, meaning they physically attach to the intestinal epithelium and establish residence rather than simply passing through. For people managing dairy intolerance, antibiotic recovery, or any condition that has disrupted the gut microbiome, water kefir provides a dense, diverse, daily inoculation of live organisms without any digestive challenge. The grains reproduce continuously. One batch, properly maintained, can produce live fermented drinks indefinitely. There is no subscription, no expiry date, just biology doing what it has always done. Here is what ties all 15 of these together. Every single one is the result of a biological process humans developed because it worked. Not because it tasted good, though many of them do. Because it kept people alive, functional, and healthy across harsh environments, long winters, and limited food supplies. Modern food science is catching up, confirming through controlled trials what generations of human experience already demonstrated through survival. The gut is not a passive system. It is the most metabolically active system in your body, running continuous negotiations between your immune cells, your nervous system, and the 38 trillion organisms you're hosting. What you feed it determines the outcome of those negotiations. Fermented food is not a trend. It is the oldest form of functional nutrition on Earth. The question isn't whether it works. The science has answered that. The question is which of these 15 you're going to start with.